Hey everyone, this video is going to look at how to create the graphic that you see before you, this skull on top of a spiral graphic. If you already have Illustrator open, you can either hit Command N to open a new file, which is located under File, New, or if you are opening up Illustrator from Creative Cloud and you're brought to the home page, you just hit New File. Here we put in our relevant information, so get in the habit of naming your files accordingly. For this one, I'm just going to do my first name, last name, Starburst skull. All of my information is here from when I created the file before. It saves your most recent data that you put in, but you're going to want to make a file that is a 1080 by 1080 pixels with just one artboard. All of your other default settings should be good. You can stick with RGB for this assignment and keep it at a raster effects of high 300 ppi. Neither one of those is going to be relevant for the assignment, but it's just good to know what they are. We hit create and we get into this. First things first, if you want your screen to match mine in order to make the tutorial go a little smoother, know that my workspace is based on the essentials setting. So I'm just going to reset it so you can see how I got to this. I ended up taking my properties panel and I clicked and dragged it so that it was over here on the side. I'm moving my comments over to my library because I don't need it. And my layers are here. I'm just going to shorten that. Additionally, I'm going to set my toolbar to advanced. This is going to be relevant, so I suggest you do it. And then going to Window Control to get my control along the top. Step 2 of this is going to be setting up your layers. So with your layers panel open, I want you to create a second layer. Your default file already comes with one built in. We can either create a new one by hitting Command L, or if you hit the Create New Layer button in the lower corner, it would also create one. I want you to double click on the layer names, which will give you the ability to rename them. So I'm going to name my layer 1 Starburst and my layer 2 Skull. Now, if I double click not directly on the text, but over to the side, it brings up my layer options. This is another location where you can rename the exact same thing. So I'm going to name this Skull. And now we can start drawing. In step 3, we're going to draw our first shape. Start by clicking on the layers panel and the small circle here to the right to target that layer. This ensures that we are drawing on our correct layer. Start by creating a circle in the center of your page by selecting the ellipse tool, which we can click and hold on our rectangle tool and access it there. You can also grab it using the key command L. Once the circle is active, I want you to click and drag to start creating this. Note that as I'm just dragging, it's creating a freeform ellipse, but if I hold Shift, it's going to lock the height and width to make a perfect circle. This does not need to be perfectly in the center of your artboard. We will fix that later. I want you to make sure the fill is set to none. That's going to be our white box with our red line through it. And we're going to have our stroke set to black. For step 4, we're going to customize this stroke. In the stroke dialog box, which you can access either by clicking on the word stroke up in your control, the word stroke in your panel on your right here, your properties panel, or you could do by opening the stroke panel as its own separate unit, which you access under Window, Stroke, hitting the hamburger menu to show additional options. I'm going to access this just by clicking on the word stroke in my properties panel. I want you to change the stroke weight to 100, set it to be a dashed line, set your dash to be 50, and your gap, just erase. Don't set it to 0. That's going to make it a solid line. Set it to nothing. Finally, you're going to notice that there's some weird things happening with one dash being extra large. If we fix the align dashes to corners and path ends, it's going to clean that up for us. If for whatever reason you can't access the dashed setting, make sure your stroke is aligned to the center of your path. If you want your starburst to look different in future iterations of this, you can always increase or decrease the dash size or add some custom settings to it. For now, I'm going to stick with 50. For step 5, we are going to expand the appearance of this shape. First, with it still selected, we are going to go to Object, Expand Appearance, and then we are going to again go to Object, Expand. Make sure you have Fill and Stroke both checked and hit OK. Notice now that instead of there being a path running through the center of this, each one of these little dashes is its own path. We can see those anchor points by going from the black selection to the white selection, which is the direct selection tool. And we can now see our individual anchor points. For the next step of this tutorial, we are going to need to select all of the anchor points that make up the center of these shapes. So we're going to click once outside of the shape to deselect it, and then we're going to use our lasso tool. This is activated by the key command Q, and you can see the tooltip, what it's going to do for us. If we use that to click and drag around our shape so that all of the anchor points that we want are contained within the span of the lasso. For step 7, we want to take all of these interior points and pull them to the middle of the circle. We do this by averaging the position of all of them. To access this, we just right click, or if you are using a trackpad, 2-finger click, and do average. We want to average both the horizontal and the vertical, so we hit both, and it pulls them all to the center. Next, we're going to scale up our starburst so that it bleeds over the edge of our artboard. We are going to use our direct selection tool, and normally when we scale and hold shift, it pulls from whatever corner that we are grabbing. However, if you want to scale up from the center, you hold shift and option at the same time, and it will scale directly from the center. That gets me about what I want, with every ray going off the edge of the page. For step 9, we want to center our starburst on our artboard. We will do this by having our object selected. If it is not, remember, use your direct selection or your black arrow tool. Click once on it, and then go up into your control area where you see your align tools. These are the same as the align tools in your properties. Make sure that this action here is set to align to artboard, and I want you to horizontal align center and vertical align center. I'm going to click once in my pasteboard to deselect. For step 10, we are going to make our first clipping mask. Using the rectangle tool, which you can access using I want you to create a box over the starburst that is the same size as your artboard. Notice that I have these helpful pink guides that are trying to allow my shape to snap to that artboard. These are what's known as smart guides, and they can be very helpful while you are initially learning the program. I'm going to hit V to re-grab my selection tool and click once in the pasteboard to deselect everything. I am then going to click and hold and drag over my starburst and my square in order to select both. We are now going to go to Object, Clipping Mask, Make, which you can do again in the future just by using Command 7. Click off your starburst to deselect. The next thing we're going to do is add a twirl to this starburst to get the effect that you see in this file. Before that though, we need to actually set our twirl settings. So for step 11, I want you to click and hold on a tool that looks like the width tool. Nested under that is several different types of warp tools. I want you to click once on twirl to make that now the active tool. We're going to change some of the settings of it, however, because likely yours do not match mine. Double click on the icon itself, and I want you to change your brush size to 1000 by 1000. Just hit OK. And for step 12, we are just going to click once directly on the center of our starburst and release it very quickly to get the result that we're looking for. So I'm just going to click once, and I held that down a little bit longer than I would have wanted. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo my action and just do one more. That's a little bit more of the smooth look I was looking for. We've completed the first layer of our illustration, so let's take a break and celebrate our success. For step 13, we're going to get started on drawing our skull. Click on the circle to the right of the word skull in your layers panel, and make sure the skull layer itself is active. This will allow us to make sure that we are drawing on that layer and not our starburst layer. I'm going to lock my starburst layer additionally so that I don't accidentally make any changes to it. I'm going to pan over to draw my skull in my pasteboard. We're going to draw a series of shapes, but we want all of their strokes to be black and their fills to be none, just so that they're a little easier to see. We're going to start by grabbing our ellipse tool, and we're going to draw a circle that is exactly 630 pixels in diameter. You can either do this by clicking and dragging while holding Shift, and then in your properties panel, change the height and the width to 630. Or you could click on your ellipse tool and just click once on your pasteboard in order to draw it with its specific settings. I also need another circle that's 190 pixels, so I'm going to use that for this one. I'm hitting V and then clicking to deselect everything. Next, I'm going to press M to get my rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw 3 different rectangles. One that is 630 by 140. One that is 380 by 270. 270. And one that is 20 by 115. The last shape that we need is a triangle that we're going to use for our nose. We are going to do this by using the polygon tool. And we can either click and put in our specific settings like we did with the ellipse, or I want to show you the other way of doing this, which is just draw your polygon. I'm going to zoom in to better see the bounding box. There's a diamond to the side of our bounding box that allows us to change the number of sides. Mine was already a triangle from having done this previously. And then in my properties setting, I click the 3 little dots here to get more options, and I'm going to set my polygon radius to 60. I'm going to increase the stroke sizes of these just so that they show up better on the screen. A little too much. I'm going to rearrange my shapes to make it a little bit easier for me to work with. And for step 14, we're going to use smart guides and our align tools to help us build the basic shape of the skull. I'm going to click on my smaller rectangle here and click and drag and allow my smart guides to help snap it to the center of my circle. I'm then going to pull my rectangle up here. I'm going to click and drag with my black arrow and use my align tools to horizontal align to center. Because they are not currently on an artboard, my Align is automatically doing this option for Align to Selection, where it's going to average the location of all of the objects I have selected. Next, we're going to draw two open paths. I'm going to just nudge my chin rectangle down slightly, and then I'm going to use my line segment tool to draw two jaw lines. Use your V to get your selection tool and click once to deselect everything. For our next step, we want to merge all of these shapes together to create one simple shape. I'm going to use my selection tool and I'm going to click and drag to select everything. And then I'm going to hit Shift M to access my Shape Builder tool. This preview gives you an idea of what that tool is going to accomplish as we merge all of our shapes together. So I'm just going to click and drag my line through everything. For step 17, we're going to draw a guide to help us place our eyes. In order to get our guidelines, you first want to have your rulers activated. So with nothing selected in your document, hit Command R. And you're going to notice some rulers appear on the top and bottom. I am now going to click and hold and drag from my top ruler, and I'm going to let my cursor run down the side of my graphic until it identifies where that original anchor point was. I want my eyes to line up to this guideline. You can toggle the guide's visibility at any time by hitting Command semicolon, and you can lock and unlock it so that it can be moved around using Option Command semicolon. For step 18, we're going to get our eyes in position. We do this by grabbing our small circle that we created and letting our smart guides help us align it to the guideline here. Hold Option and notice that my cursor changed to two stacked triangles. And you're going to drag to the side, all still while holding Option. If you hold Shift, it will make it so that it drags perfectly along a straight line. For step 19, we're going to use the same strategy along with Shape Builder to create our nose. So we click and drag our triangle up between our two eyes, and then we are going to click, hold Option, start dragging, and then hold Shift in order to get it where we want it. I'm going to click and drag over both of my triangles to select both of them, and then hit Shift M to get my Shape Builder tool again. This time, instead of merging shapes, we're going to subtract shapes. To access Shape Builder's subtract mode, just have the tool active and hold Option. Notice how my cursor changes from having a plus sign to a minus. Drag over the areas you want to erase, and we're left with this complex shape. For step 20, we're going to round the corners of this with our direct selection tool. Tap V to get your selection tool, and then tap A to switch to the direct selection tool, your white arrow. When we have A activated, we now have access to these little bullseyes, which if we click and drag towards the center of our shape, allow us to round the corners. Notice that they're restricted because they are all being moved as one unit. I'm going to move it in a little bit to get it where I want on the inside. And then if I want to change any more of these edges, I can click on them individually with my white arrow. So I'm going to click here, click on my left side while holding Shift, and that's going to give me both of those bullseyes. Click and drag them in to curve them a little more. And I like my top one kind of the way it is. And that gets me a shape that I'm pretty happy with. We've spent some time looking at the Shape Builder tool, but now we're going to switch to the Pathfinder tool, which is similar but different in a couple of key ways. To do this, we're going to create the mouth of our skull. Grab your selection tool. You're going to do the Option click drag from your eye to bring your circle down for where your mouth is going to go. I have mine centered over my nose. And then I'm going to draw a rectangle, that overlaps with the top half of that circle. I'm going to leave that selected, hold Shift and click, and then you'll notice that my Pathfinder options show up in my Properties panel. I'm going to hit this second one that says minus front. It's going to erase everything in that rectangle's area. I'm going to move the mouth up just a little bit. I'm zooming out, and then I'm going to move over and grab my last rectangle that I created, and I'm going to use this to make my teeth. I'm going to click and drag it up over my mouth, and then we are going to do that Option Shift click to duplicate it. I'm going to intentionally be imprecise with this to show you how we can fix it after the fact. I'm just going to click and drag to select all of my shapes that I would like to have more perfectly aligned. And I'm going to make sure that I hit Align to Selection. And I'm going to hit the vertical Align Center and then the horizontal Distribute Center. And that really cleans it up. If you, for whatever reason, don't like this and want to adjust the spacing of it, you could always move your left and your right ones over slightly, select them all again, and hit Distribute Center again. In order for the next part of this to work, we need to convert our teeth to be a compound shape. We're going to click and select just across the tops of those rectangles to get all of them selected. Make sure you don't accidentally select your mouth in the process. We'll then go to Object, Compound Path, Make, which in the future you can do using Command 8. You'll notice a difference right away if you look in your Layers panel that this went from being multiple individual rectangles to being one compound shape, which is labeled as such in the Layers panel. What this means is that Illustrator is treating this as a single object. The whole reason we did this was for step 24, which is going to be using the Pathfinder tool to erase out the whole center of all of these teeth. Pathfinder only works if there are two objects. Notice in my layers that my rectangle is on top of my compound path, and we're just going to hit minus front. And suddenly we have a very nice, clean series of teeth that we'll be able to manipulate from here. I'm going to back up slightly just to show you what would have happened if I had done this as a group instead. Select that and my rectangle. And if I hit minus front, I'm left with only the bottommost item, which can be very frustrating. If this ever happens, just consider that you most likely had a group or just additional shapes involved in your Pathfinder that you didn't realize. My teeth ended up a little short there, but I can fix that pretty easily. For step 25, I'm going to edit in isolation mode. This happens for both groups and compound paths, and it gives you the ability to edit the objects within that unified setting. I want to move my teeth down and give them all sort of a rounded effect. If I double click on them, you're going to immediately notice that any other artwork becomes dimmer, and we enter a little special mode in the Layers panel called Isolation Mode, where we can see all of our individual teeth. I'm going to click and drag to select all of the top ones, and I'm going to move them down slightly. I'm going to do the same marquee selection, but this time with my white arrow to select all of the bottom anchor points. This is kind of similar to what we did with the lasso tool, but worked easier because these were all in a straight line. I'm going to click and drag to round all of my corners a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing with my bottom teeth. Note that these two on the very end, since they aren't going to be inside my mouth anyway, I can always just delete them. Double click anywhere in your pasteboard or outside of your compound path to get out of isolation mode. When I used Pathfinder on my compound path, it turned it into a group, which you can see in my layers over here. I'm going to do one more Pathfinder effect to it, so I do need to take that group again and make it a compound path, which we can do just using Command 8. You may have noticed when you went to use your Pathfinder before, when you had two different objects selected and you hovered over Pathfinder, there was a tooltip here saying Alt-click to create a compound shape. We're actually going to take advantage of that this time. So hold Option or Alt on a PC and click once, and suddenly we get this really great complex shape. This can get really helpful if you are ever trying to do something where you want to be able to make changes after the fact. So for example, if I just wanted to erase this tooth altogether without having to worry about fixing that path after the fact, I could. For step 27, we're just going to change our fills, our strokes, and do a couple little final touches. So I'm going to zoom out. I am going to grab my eyes, my nose, and the compound shape that I use to make my mouth, and I'm going to set all of their fills together to be black. I'm going to turn their stroke off, and I'm going to click on my outermost part of the skull, and I'm going to increase the stroke weight to about 20 to kind of give it this softer look. Lastly, I'm going to grab some different parts of the skull just to soften some of these edges. And actually, I'm going to click on my chin here. I'm going to hold Shift and tap my arrow to the right just to move that anchor point in to give the chin just a little bit of a taper. I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to grab my overall skull shape and I'm going to give it a fill of white. Then I'm going to click and drag over my entire skull and hit Command G to make it one unified group. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to hit Command semicolon to turn off my guide. And I'm going to move it over onto my artboard to make it nice and centered. Click once off the pasteboard, and then I'm going to hit Command 0 to fully fill my screen with my artwork so that I can look at the entire piece as a unit. Congratulations! So after you take a break, you can move on to part 2 of the assignment where you customize this with your own colors, decorations, and warp effects. So you could do something like revisiting the Starburst and maybe taking advantage of some of the other tools here, maybe applying more than one twirl on the entire piece. You could change maybe your eye to something a little funky, give it a little more personality. So do something goofy like that. You could take advantage of your pucker and bloat to pull some details of this in or out. Maybe give your skull a mohawk or something else fun happening. I also want you to take advantage of your shape builder and your Pathfinder to create some kind of additional decoration to this. So whether that's a bow or maybe some different decorations in the background, some type of graphic applied to this skull, like a crack or anything like that, that lets you sort of play around more with the shapes and customize this to make it your own. And don't forget to change out the colors using your fill and your stroke to play with something a little bit more imaginative. That's all for now, and I'll check back in with you later.